This episode contains graphic content that may not be suitable for all ages. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat with someone at 988lifeline.org. Those outside of the US, reach out to someone at your local crisis center or hotline. Please do not suffer in silence. By the end of 1967, after months of public speculation, contradictory witness accounts, and failed forensic efforts, the official investigation into the lead mask case was brought to a close. The final police report listed the cause of death for both Miguel José Viana and Manuel Pereira de Cruz as undetermined. There was no evidence of foul play, no external injuries, no sign of trauma. The bodies had not been robbed, nor had they been bound or restrained. There were no suspects, no known accomplices. No crime, as defined by Brazilian law, had taken place, at least none that could be proven. The masks were recorded in the case file as homemade items fashioned from lead. Their purpose, according to the investigating officers, could not be definitively explained. The notebook, containing a brief and cryptic instruction, was filed as a personal possession with no further analysis attached. The towels and water bottle were noted, but never tied to any larger purpose. There was no final theory offered up by law enforcement, no declaration of intent, no ruling of suicide or accident or even ritual. The documents reflect only what was known, and that in the end was not much. So, no legal action was taken. The families of Miguel and Manoel were left without answers. They buried their sons, brothers, cousins, two men that had gone on what they said was a business trip and never returned. In public, the case became a curiosity. In private, it was a source of grief and confusion. The men's relatives were subjected to rumors and headlines. Some defended the victims, stating firmly that the men were not involved in drugs, cults, or conspiracies. Others, perhaps quietly, may have wondered if something had indeed gone wrong, something that they weren't meant to understand. In the years that followed, the case drifted into Brazil's cultural memory, taking on the shape of legend. The masks became symbols. The note became code. The men became characters in a story that no one could finish. But to the police, it was simpler. There was no evidence to support any single explanation, and without that evidence, they could only close the case file and move on. This is part 2 of the lead mask case. Long before Vintame Hill and the headlines that followed, Miguel José Viana and Manuel Pereira de Cruz lived quiet lives in a city called Campos dos Goytacazes. Located in the northern region of the Rio de Janeiro state, the city, often called just Campos by locals, was in the 1960s a mid-sized city straddling both tradition and progress. Sugarcane plantations had long dominated the local economy, but by the middle of the 20th century, the region was undergoing change. New factories and small-scale industries were springing up. Technical schools and workshops provided skills training to a growing working class. And, like much of Brazil at the time, Campos was a place where spiritual belief did not compete with modern life. It existed right alongside it. This was Brazil in the years following President Juscelino Kubitschek's rapid modernization campaign. A time when optimism about science and technology was met with economic instability and growing social unrest. The country was teetering between visions of progress and the realities of poverty. Political tensions were rising, and 2 years before the lead mask case, Brazil had undergone a military coup. Beneath that volatility, there was something more enduring: faith. In Campos, Catholicism remained the dominant religious force, but Spiritism, a belief system centered on communication with the dead, was also widely practiced. Brought to Brazil in the late 1800s and based on the teachings of French thinker Allan Kardec, Spiritism had found a uniquely Brazilian expression. It was less about doctrine and more about method, things such as seances, rituals, even meditation. In some cases, practitioners blended these beliefs with science and electronics, seeing in technology not just a tool for earthly convenience, but a gateway to something beyond. It was within this environment that Miguel José Viana and Manuel Pereira de Cruz came of age. The two men knew each other well. friends, collaborators, possibly even co-workers at various points. Both were in their early 30s. Both worked in electronics, a field that in 1960s Brazil was seen as a marker of intelligence and modern skill. While some reports describe them simply as technicians, other sources suggest they were more than just repairmen. Miguel, for instance, owned a small radio repair shop in Campos. He was described by neighbors as intelligent, introverted, and deeply interested in electronics, not a man given to outward displays of emotion. Manoel was more sociable by comparison. He lived with his partner and children, and by all accounts was known as a dependable provider. He too worked with electronics and shared Miguel's interest in both technical tinkering and spiritual questions. Those close to him said that he believed in the potential to bridge science and metaphysical experience. Friends and family described both men as curious, bright, and soft-spoken. They were not outsiders in the traditional sense. They both held jobs, participated in their community, and gave no outward signs that they were preparing for anything unusual. But they did share something else, a deeper fascination with forces that lay just outside of the visible world. Whether through religious groups, local spiritist communities, or self-directed experimentation, both Miguel and Manoel are believed to have engaged in scientific spiritualism, a hybrid belief system that combined spiritual contact with technological methods. In their world, electrical energy wasn't just for powering radios. It might, under the right conditions, allow for contact with other realms. With the right devices, tuned to the proper frequencies, it was believed that messages could pass from one plane of existence to another. There's no indication that either man was part of a cult or a secret society of any kind. There were no robes or hierarchies, but those who knew them said they believed their experiments might lead to a revelation, perhaps even communication with beings beyond. And in the weeks leading up to their deaths, something seems to have shifted. Both became more withdrawn, more focused. They made unusual purchases. They asked questions, and then they left. They told their families it was a simple work trip, that they would be back soon. Instead, they were both found over 280 kilometers away, on a hillside, dead with no explanation. Miguel José Viana and Manuel Pereira de Cruz weren't just technicians. In Campos dos Goitacazes, they were known for more than their work repairing radios and electrical wiring. Among a small but curious group of peers, they were considered seekers, men drawn to something beyond the material world. As I touched on in the last segment, in the mid-1960s, Brazil was home to a flourishing subculture of scientific spiritualism. In this framework, spiritual contact was not limited to seances or candles. In this framework, spiritual contact wasn't limited to just seances or candles. It could be achieved through the construction of specialized devices. Antennas, batteries, copper coils, crystals, and magnets were seen by some as tools for opening the doorway between worlds. Miguel and Manoel were reportedly involved in one such group. While it never operated under a formal name and left behind no documentation, interviews with locals later suggested that its members believed in using technology to enhance spiritual communication. It was said that the men had experimented with basic signal equipment and circuits, trying to build receivers or emitters that could channel messages from beyond. There were rumors that they had even tried to tune devices to specific frequencies meant to connect with spirits, or beings of higher consciousness. None of these devices were ever recovered, mind you, but the stories persisted. That not only were the men interested in building these devices, they believed that they were close to doing so. According to several acquaintances, Miguel and Manoel had taken part in earlier experiments, or rituals. These attempts reportedly involved similar preparations to what investigators later found on Vintém Hill: fasting, silence, a remote location, and masks. The masks were believed to help with concentration, or possibly to shield them from harmful energies or blinding visions during contact. One account, though never confirmed in official records, tells of a third man who was invited to join them on their final trip to Niterói, but backed out at the last moment. Whether out of fear, doubt, or scheduling, he declined to go. In hindsight, this anonymous individual was treated as a survivor, even though what the men intended, and what actually happened, remained unknown. In the days leading up to their departure, neither Miguel nor Manoel acted in a way that raised alarm. They did not say goodbye, they didn't leave notes. They just told their families that they were going to Niterói to buy materials for work. Nothing unusual. a routine, quick trip. But there were some small signs that something was different. Miguel borrowed a modest sum of money from a friend, explaining only that he needed it to buy materials. It was never specified what kind. The men packed light, cash in their pockets, but no food, no luggage, and no change of clothes. They didn't carry personal belongings, nor did they bring tools. They left on the morning of August 17th, 1966, boarding a bus that would take them more than 270 kilometers southwest to Niterói. It wasn't their first trip to the city, but it would be their last. To their loved ones, nothing about their departures suggested anything ominous. The goodbyes were brief, unremarkable. They were expected back in a day or two. But the nature of their preparations, the raincoats, the towels, the masks, suggest otherwise. They weren't traveling to attend a meeting. They weren't traveling for business. They were heading into something else. And whatever it was, they had planned for it. Together. Of all the theories surrounding the lead mask case, the most basic is also one of the hardest to confirm, that Miguel and Manoel intended to die, that they willingly took part in a spiritual practice or experimental ritual that cost them their lives. On its face, this theory explains some of the case's most puzzling elements. The men brought no weapons, food, or clothing. They carried just enough money for transportation and a few purchases. Their notebook contained no names, no addresses, no contacts. Just a short, disjointed message that read like a set of instructions. 1630 be at the specified location. 1830 ingest capsules. After effect, protect metals, await signal, mask. To some, it read like a step-by-step plan. Arrive at a destination, take a pill, put on a protective mask, and wait for a signal. But was this suicide? Or was it something less intentional? Supporters of the suicide theory point to the ritualistic nature of the scene. The men did not appear to be fleeing from anything. There were no signs of distress. Their bodies were found lying side by side, undisturbed, as if they had calmly laid down and waited for something to happen. They were dressed for rain, and their faces were protected from something. It all suggested a kind of preparation, perhaps even a belief. Brazilian police at the time explored the possibility, noting that the men may have been attempting a form of contact, spiritual, paranormal, or chemical, and died in the process. One report mentioned the potential ingestion of an unknown substance, but no pills or containers were ever recovered from the scene. No drug paraphernalia, no trace evidence to indicate what, if anything, they took. This led others to suggest that it wasn't suicide in the conventional sense, but rather a spiritual misadventure. In this interpretation, the men expected to survive. They believed that whatever they were doing, whether it was taking a pill, entering a trance, or receiving a message, would lead to enlightenment, not death. The mask, in that case, may have been meant to shield them from a visionary experience. The towels, perhaps to clean themselves afterward. The water, to take the capsules. The message, maybe it was a guide written by someone they trusted, or by themselves, under the belief that what they were doing was safe, or even sacred. But this theory also leaves gaps. There were no religious symbols at the scene, no writings about transcendence, no references to God or spirits or energy. The note did not invoke any higher powers. It was practical, mechanical. If the men believed they were making contact with the divine, or crossing into another dimension, they left no record of it, at least not one that's ever been found. And if this was a suicide, it did not follow a typical pattern. There was no farewell, no confession, no effort to ensure their families understood. They simply vanished, and then they were found. That silence is what makes this theory difficult to dismiss, but also impossible to confirm. Now, we're going to pause for just a moment to hear a word from the sponsors that support the show. Another theory that gained traction, both in the press and among investigators, is that Miguel and Manoel may have taken some kind of psychoactive substance, hoping to trigger a visionary or transcendent experience. It suggests the ingestion of something, possibly a drug, probably a compound prepared in advance. The phrase after effect hints that they expected to feel something. A physical change, a psychological reaction, perhaps even a hallucinatory state. The mask could have been intended to shield them from light or stimulus during this altered condition. In this reading, the signal was not literal, but internal, something they expected to experience under the influence. At the time, Brazil was experiencing a growing underground interest in alternative medicine, which included homeopathy and fringe pharmacology. While psychedelics like LSD weren't widely available, some substances, both natural or synthetic, circulated through spiritualist groups, often with little documentation. But here's where the theory begins to fall apart. No capsules, wrappers, or containers were ever found at the scene. No residue. No tools for mixing or ingesting drugs. And critically, the bodies were never subjected to a full toxicological analysis. By the time that step was considered, decomposition had advanced too far to yield any reliable results. So while the language of the note strongly supports the idea that something was consumed, the evidence ends there. We don't know what it was, and we don't know who provided it. We don't know whether it was taken voluntarily, or whether something went wrong after the fact. Without any substance to test, this theory remains plausible, but unproven. Some believe the lead mask case wasn't about suicide or vision quest. It was about a failed experiment. Miguel and Manoel were trained electronics technicians. Both worked with circuitry, coils, and signal equipment on a regular basis. They lived in a time when science and spiritualism were often blurred, especially in Brazil's growing subcultures of scientific spiritualism. To many in those circles, the spirit world was not accessed through prayer or ritual alone. It could be reached through energy, magnetism, and machines. There were rumors, unconfirmed but consistent, that the men had built devices designed to detect or emit signals tied to metaphysical phenomena. One witness claimed that they had attempted similar rituals before, possibly using these devices alongside fasting and mental preparation. The theory goes like this. The men weren't trying to die. They were conducting a carefully planned operation. The masks were protective gear. The towels part of their cleanup. The signal was real, something they believed they could measure or receive. Maybe it was light, maybe it was energy. Maybe it was something not fully understood by either. But something went wrong. There was a miscalculation, a faulty chemical, a breakdown in the method. The experiment turned lethal. Quietly and without violence. There was no dramatic explosion or collapse. Just two men lying side by side, waiting for something that never came. This theory fits the men's backgrounds, and it frames the case not as a mystery of death, but a failure of belief in what science, in their eyes, could reveal. There exists a quieter theory about the lead mask case, one that doesn't involve spirits, experiments, or even intention. It suggests that Miguel and Manoel were set up. According to this version, the two men were tricked into going to Vintame Hill under false pretenses. They may have believed they were participating in a ritual or an experiment, or maybe even receiving some form of secret knowledge. But someone else, someone not found at the scene, may have given them instructions that ultimately led to their deaths. There are several small details that give this theory some weight. First, the note found in their notebook doesn't read like personal thoughts. It reads like instructions given to them. Specific times, specific actions. Ingest capsules, await signal. If the note wasn't written by them or was copied from someone else, it could reflect a process dictated by a third party. Second, Miguel borrowed money before leaving Campos dos Goitacazes. He didn't tell anyone exactly what it was for. If the men were purchasing something, an ingredient, a device, even information, it raises the question, who sold it to them? Third, they brought only the essentials. No food, no overnight supplies, no tools. Whatever they were expecting, they believed it would happen quickly. If someone misled them, intentionally or not, it wouldn't have taken much. Then there was the fact that when they were spotted in town, in Niterói, both seemed to be looking to the street. They seemed to be looking over their shoulder for someone, as if they were waiting. And yet, if this was a scam, it wasn't one driven by robbery. The men still had cash on them. They weren't stripped of valuables. No clear motive ever emerged, and no individual ever came forward. There were no arrests, no known suspects, no follow-up interviews that led anywhere conclusive. So if someone did deceive them, they vanished, leaving behind only silence and two men waiting for something that may never have existed at all. Beyond the plausible explanations, ritual, experiment, deception, there are the theories that live on the margins, the ones that rely less on evidence and more on imagination. And yet they've stuck with this case, perhaps because the mystery leaves so much room for speculation. One of these common fringe theories ties the lead mask case to extraterrestrial contact. Brazil in the 1960s was no stranger to UFO reports. Just a decade earlier, the well-known case of Antonio Villas Boas made international headlines after a farmer claimed to have been abducted by humanoid aliens. That story, and others like it, planted the idea in the public's mind that contact, real, physical contact, was possible. In the lead mask case, believers point to the wording of the note, "await signal." They interpret this not as a metaphor or inner experience, but as a literal broadcast, a message from another world. The masks, in this theory, weren't for light or energy. They were for protection during a physical encounter with non-human beings. Radiation shielding, sensory dampening, an attempt to survive a moment of extraordinary contact. Others suggest that the men may have been influenced by occult practices. Not formal religion, but esoteric traditions that promised hidden knowledge in exchange for ritual compliance. In this reading, the instructions in the notebook resemble initiation steps, designed to elevate the practitioners to a new spiritual plane. Perhaps the men believed they would not die, but transcend. Still, others link the case to secret societies, government experiments, or interdimensional travel. None of these theories are grounded in any evidence, but they persist, partly because the facts left behind are so fragmentary. A hilltop, 2 bodies, lead mask, no known cause of death. When so little is known, the strange can start to feel plausible, and the line between theory and mythology begins to blur. More after the break. For every theory that's been proposed, ritual suicide, drug-induced trance, scientific experiment, deception, or contact with something not of this world, there are parts of the case that simply don't align. Take the idea of suicide. The men made no effort to say goodbye to their families. They left behind no letters, said no farewells. They did not leave any notes of remorse, spiritual transition, or purpose. They told their families that they were going to go buy some equipment and would be back soon. That doesn't really track with someone preparing for the end. The spiritual misadventure theory suggests that they intended to survive, but the preparation still feels incomplete. If they were going to ingest capsules and wait for a transformation or a vision, why did they bring so little? Why no shelter, no backup plan, no indication of what they were trying to reach? The drug theory makes sense on paper. The wording in the note fits, but there's no physical evidence, no pills, no containers, and most damning of all, no toxicology was ever performed, at least not in time to provide clarity. The key question, what did they take, will never be answered. As for the scientific experiment theory, it does fit their backgrounds. They were technicians. They believed in the possibility of spiritual contact through technology. But if this was an experiment, why did they bring with them no equipment? Why only the lead mask but no measuring devices? Why a notebook with only brief instructions and no diagrams or schematics? The scam or coercion theory raises important questions about manipulation. But again, there's no trail. If someone tricked them, someone took their money or set them up, they left behind no trace. There's no evidence of a third party whatsoever. No theft took place. There were no known associates with a motive. And the more fringe theories, they persist because of the vacuum left by the more traditional explanations. But they rely on belief, not evidence. And while some of them do make for compelling stories, none of them close the loop. And that's the problem. Each theory answers some of the mystery, but none of them seem to explain all of it. Why were there no capsules found? Why did they bring the towels? Why have lead mask with no fastenings? Why go to such a remote location with no shelter? Who wrote the note? And what did await signal mean to them? The lead mask case continues to fascinate not because of what's known, but because of what's missing. It's not just an unsolved death of 2 men. It's a story where none of the available answers satisfy the logic we're used to relying on. And that's what keeps the mystery alive. For the families of Miguel José Viana and Manuel Pereira de Cruz, the case did not end with the closing of the police case file. In Campos dos Goitacazes, their hometown, the lead mask case is remembered not as an urban legend, but as a wound that never quite healed. Their loved ones were ordinary men, technicians, friends, sons, a father, who left for what was supposed to be a brief work trip to Niterói, and then they just never came back. The emotional toll left on both families was lasting, not only because of their loss, but because of the way they were lost. The questions that followed, the headlines, the photographs of their bodies printed in newspapers. The mask, especially, became a kind of symbol, one that detached both men from their lives and turned their deaths into a spectacle. Over the years, family members gave statements to the press expressing frustration, confusion, and grief. Some denied that the men were involved in anything spiritual or paranormal. Others admitted that they did not know what to believe anymore. No one, however, had closure. In Campos, the story passed from generation to generation, not with certainty, but with unease. Their names became familiar not just for who they were, but for how they were found. Across Brazil, the phrase lead mask case entered public consciousness as shorthand for strange and unexplainable deaths. The case was reenacted on Brazilian television. It appeared in crime anthologies, documentaries, and later in the growing world of online mystery forums. In Portuguese-language blogs and YouTube videos, the case is often listed alongside other strange stories from Brazil's modern history. Internationally, it appears in Reddit threads, podcasts, and websites dedicated to unsolved mysteries. The details, lead mask, a cryptic note, unexplained deaths, are just too strange not to capture attention. It has become, in many ways, a case more remembered than understood. And within Brazil's long history of paranormal lore, the lead mask case now sits beside other infamous events. The Colares Lights, a 1977 incident where residents of Pará reported injuries after alleged UFO encounters. The Varginha incident, sometimes called Brazil's Roswell, involving claims of captured alien beings in the 1990s. These cases, like the lead mask, became part of a uniquely Brazilian mythology, one where the spiritual, the unexplained, and the modern collide. The lead mask case isn't just a mystery, it's a cultural artifact, a moment frozen in time, passed down not just through documents but through memory and retelling. And the further it drifts from the present, the harder it becomes to separate the men from the myth. Even after decades of speculation, investigation, and retelling, the most important questions remain unanswered. Why were no capsules ever found? The notebook instructed the men to ingest something, presumably a drug or a compound, but the scene held no trace of containers, wrappers, or residue. If the men brought something with them, it disappeared without a trace. If someone else supplied it, that person never came forward. If nothing was ingested at all, the purpose of the note becomes even harder to understand. Why didn't anyone else come forward? If this was part of a group ritual, if others had participated in similar experiments or practices, why has no one ever spoken publicly? Some suggested a third man backed out at the last minute. If that's true, he never gave a full statement. No one from their supposed spiritualist circle has explained what the men were trying to do. If there was a community, it chose silence. Who wrote the note? Its phrasing, be at the specified location, await signal, protect metals, feels procedural, almost instructional. It does not read like something jotted down during a moment of reflection or clarity. Was it written by Miguel or Manoel? Was it copied from something else entirely? We still don't know. What was the signal? Was it literal, a sound, a transmission, a vision? If they were expecting something external, nothing arrived. If it was metaphorical, its meaning has been lost. And what were the masks protecting against? Were they meant to shield their eyes from light, radiation, or something unknown? Were they part of a symbolic act? The materials suggest intention, but the reasoning behind their design has never been confirmed. The further away that the story moves from its origin, the less likely it is that any of these questions will ever be answered. The police reports are closed, the bodies are buried, the evidence has decayed, been lost, or was never there to begin with. All that remains are the fragments. 2 names, a hillside, a note, and 2 pieces of lead shaped to cover their eyes. For nearly 60 years, the facts have not changed, but the way we interpret them has. Some see the lead mask case as a warning, others see it as a parable, some see it as evidence of a world beyond our own, and others just see 2 men lying side by side, waiting for something that never came. Some stories are strange because they defy explanation. This one lingers because it refuses to tell us what it wants to be. And after all these years, the stories of Manoel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana remain unresolved. Thank you all for listening to Unresolved. I have been your host, Micheal Whelan. Research and writing for this episode was done by Amelia White. Hosting, production, and additional writing by myself, Micheal Whelan. The music you're hearing right now, the Unresolved theme song, was composed by Ailsa Traves. To learn more about this podcast, visit the Unresolved website at unresolved.me. There you can follow along with a transcript for each episode, or learn how to support the show through Patreon. The latter of which allows you to become a producer of the show, such as the following wonderful people: Roberta Jansen, Sarah Moscartolo, Ben Crocum, Scott Meesey, Marion Welsh, Crystal J, Jacinda Class, Lauren Nicole, James Weiss, Alex Kalogeropoulos, Annie Broad, Kevin Tweedy, Stephen Diaz, Heather Fiddler, Anna T, Cece, Marcus Mitchell, Tabitha Colvin, Trixie Fink, and Nora Urkuyo. Hopefully I did not butcher any of your names. Apologies if I did. Thank you all for your continued support. As we inch ever closer to the 10-year mark of Unresolved, I'd really like to continue making the show a priority. So please try and support the show however you can, whether it be through Patreon or PayPal, or even by spreading the word. Share this podcast with those in your life who have an interest in true crime or mystery. Talk about it online on forums like the True Crime Podcast subreddit, or on Web Sleuths, stuff like that. And if you can, head on over to Apple Podcast or Spotify or wherever you're listening now and leave the podcast a good review. Help others find it through the algorithm. Thank you for those that do. Being an independent podcast in this day and age, when every media company is beginning to dip their toe in podcast, it feels overwhelming at times. So thank you for keeping this show, a small independent one-man production, going. And please make sure to go over and subscribe to the newest podcast from Unresolved Productions called Post-Truth. I've been hard at work trying to bring back my podcast hoax, and this is the next incarnation of it. I'm excited to have finally started that just a few weeks ago, so make sure to subscribe to that feed and get every new episode as it comes out. Patrons also get some bonus episodes, what I'm calling interludes, which help fill in some of the gaps between those stories. Anyhow, thank you all again. Until next time, I hope you all stay healthy, stay active, and stay safe. Take care.